Can these bones live? These bones? The bones we were just thinking about, those tired bones, wanting God to take your hand and lead you home. Whatever bones, but specific these bones, not just generic bones. Let's set up a couple of snapshots. I think there are half a dozen snapshots, actually. Little quick glimpses. We had one of those little trajectory things. We could put the picture up here for you to see, but you have to use your imagination for it this morning. One of my teachers, Tom Traeger, says that imagination is better than anything else anyway, so we can use our imagination this morning. Can these bones live? I started thinking about this sermon by looking at a picture that someone sent me. Kind of a gruesome picture. It looks like sort of a concrete prison cell kind of thing, except you can't see the bars in the front. And against the back wall of this prison cell-looking room, this gray cement room, there are human bones stacked up like cordwood. Stacked up, a very high stack, higher than head high, and across the top of the stack there are skulls and pelvises. Kind of a gruesome picture of bones. And they've been there a while. The room was very, very clean. There was no mess or anything. The bones, it was said, were from a Cambodian genocide. Victims from this genocide. And there was this stack of bones. And a young Cambodian woman was standing in front of it, sort of like a tour guide, inviting us to explore the image that was in front of us. I don't know whether any of those bones were bones of her ancestor. But it was quite a place to start beginning to wonder if these bones, the bones of people killed in a genocide, could live. But Ezekiel's telling, the vision that Ezekiel had is very much a metaphor, and so a metaphor invites us to spin out and think about a lot of other things. What about along the main street of almost every small town, especially small rural towns, or many cities too for that matter? You can go to Peoria, you can go to Bloomington, you can go to Kankakee, you can go to Chicago, and find along Main Street building after building that stands there empty. The bones are there. Some of these buildings are in pretty good shape, some of them are in terrible disrepair, but the bones are there. Sometimes a building in pretty good shape. Electricity is there, the gas is there, the water is there, the sewer is there, the parking space is there. Everything is there except the life. There is no life in the bones. Can these bones live? We've just come to the end of an election cycle. There have been all of these people running for mayor and people running for city council who've been saying over and over, I know what to do about all those dead bones downtown. People have been saying that for 40 years too, and the bones are still there. Can these bones live? I came to be your pastor just a few months ago, over and over in a variety of ways. Nobody used exactly this language, but the meaning was there. They asked me, can these bones live? The bones are here. We have a pretty good building. We have the musical instruments, we have the utilities, the heat, the air conditioning, we have all of the stuff, the pews, the hymnals, we have the bones. Of course, you know that the real bones of a church are not bricks and mortar. The real bones of the church are the people who are faithful to the congregation, the people who are committed to the congregation, the people who are concerned for the congregation's ministry and vigor. Those are the real bones of a congregation. Those are the real bones of a church. And the bones are here. Can these bones live? Another snapshot. Most of us have been to the cemetery. Maybe we've been to the cemetery many times. I have been to the cemetery many, many times as a pastor. But I've also been to the cemetery as a friend. I've also been to the cemetery as a grandson. I've also been to the cemetery as a son-in-law. Not so long ago, the cemetery as a son. So I have felt the pain. I have felt the loss. I have felt the separation. And I too have asked, can these bones live? These bones of the loved one we have brought to the cemetery, can these bones live, or are these bones lost to us forever? Maybe there's even a more personal snapshot. Sometimes it's my bones that are exposed, or your bones that are exposed. Anybody here ever lost a job that you really needed? Anybody here ever lost a marriage? Anybody here ever lost your health? It's pretty deadly stuff, and it leaves your bones breathless. And these bones live, my bones, your bones, because in a dozen ways we die. In a dozen ways we die. Can these bones live? And what about Lazarus' bones? That's the story we read. That's a wonderfully powerful story. Can Lazarus' bones live? Mary and Martha, each one of them said to Jesus in their own way, if you had listened to us, if you had come when we asked you to come, all of this would be irrelevant. We wouldn't be worried about somebody's bones. But Jesus didn't come. So now it's not only bones, but it's stench. And Jesus told the disciples back at the beginning of the story that this was one of those signs. We heard about signs last week in conjunction with the story of the man born blind. These signs, things that Jesus does in order to reveal God's glory, things that Jesus does so that the Son of Man may be glorified through it. And I can hear Mary and Martha saying to Jesus, well, that's all fine and good, but the next time you want to show your glory, pick somebody else. Why didn't you come in time to spare us from all of this? And what about Jesus' bones? Jesus' bones. You heard Thomas say to the other disciples as they were beginning to make their journey to Bethany, let us go that we may also die with him. Because the disciples know, and Jesus knows, and everybody who has heard this story knows that things are taking shape in terrible kinds of ways. When Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, Jesus also intensified the opposition against him. The opposition that started out early on saying, we got to get rid of this guy, but now they really mean it. Because when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, you can go on to read after we stop reading in the verses following, that the people began to abandon the old traditional faith and began to turn to Jesus and started to follow Jesus. And the people who held the power in the old traditional faith wouldn't let that happen. They knew now, no matter what, no matter how, some way or other, Jesus has to die. And the ambiguity of the Gospel of John is about how all of that somehow becomes glory. But it also explains, in our Bible, the language is pretty tame about Jesus weeping and such. This is not just shedding a tear or two. This is gut-wrenching, huge emotion, the kind of stuff that tears your throat apart, the kind of stuff that tears your lungs out, the kind of stuff that wrenches your insides so you can hardly stand it. Gut-wrenching emotion as Jesus meets Mary's grief, as he stands at the tomb, as he smells the stench. Gut-wrenching grief because of Mary, because of Martha, because of Lazarus, and also because he feels now very keenly his own fate. Never mind, people say. Never mind, it's not such a big deal because Jesus knows what's going to happen on the third day. That's all true. You know, and I know, that Friday will be a day so horrible that it will feel like forever. And you have had Fridays like that too. One day, a short time, but it feels like forever because of how horrible it was. Can these bones live? These bones. Ezekiel gives God the only answer a human being can give to God. This is not a question that human beings can answer. This is only a question that God can answer. Only God knows what is possible for the bones, any of the bones, all of the bones, especially these bones and these bones. Only God knows. Ezekiel doesn't know. The politicians in the city council don't know. The pastors don't know. The physicians don't know. Only God knows. You know what happens next. You know what happens next. In a very soft and gentle way, the wind of God's Spirit begins to blow. The wind of God's Spirit begins to blow, and the bones begin to breathe. The wind of God's Spirit begins to blow, and the bones begin to rattle themselves together. Because you see, resurrection is never a solo act. Resurrection always takes at least two, sometimes more than two. The bones have to rattle themselves together in order for there to be any resurrection. And so the bones rattle themselves together because the wind of God's Spirit blows into them. The wind of God's Spirit begins to blow, and the bones begin to stand up together. The bones stand up and start doing what life demands, so that the one whose wind is blowing, the one whose breath is empowering, may indeed be revealed and may indeed be glorified. the wind of God's Spirit begins to blow, and the gathered bones become a church. A church like us. A church of people who witness to God's amazing grace at work. People who work to do that amazing grace in our deeds of witness, because God, the God who gives breath to the bones, also gives breath to us. And the God who calls Lazarus out of the tomb calls us also forth from the clutches of death. And the God who brought Jesus to life makes us alive with the life that Jesus has. Can these bones live? Only God knows. Only God knows. But we know what we pray for. Thou whose purpose is to kindle, ignite us with thy fire. While the earth awaits thy burning, with thy passion us inspire. Overcome our sinful calmness, rouse us with redemptive shame, baptize us with thy fiery spirit, crown our lives with tongues of fire. Sing those words now as